Here's what nobody's telling you. While you're doom-scrolling articles about rent hitting $3,000 for a studio with a hot plate and a view of a dumpster, there are 8 major US cities where rents are quietly, consistently, and dramatically falling. We're not talking about 1% statistical noise. We're talking 8%, 10%, in some cases 15% year-over-year drops. Real money, real relief, and the silence around it is deafening. Tampa rents are down double digits. Austin is panic offering 2 months free. Boise is hemorrhaging renters. Atlanta's Wall Street landlords are dumping portfolios and running. Why isn't this the story? Because fear gets clicks, and admitting the market can correct would collapse the real estate influencer industrial complex. But the data doesn't lie. According to Zillow, Apartments.com, and local MLS reports, these 8 cities are experiencing sustained rent declines that should be front page news. We're counting down from number 8 to number 1 to find out what's really happening, why rents are falling, and what it means for renters who've been told to just accept getting gouged forever. If you're tired of rent horror stories and want actual opportunities, hit that like button and let's find out where in America rent is becoming affordable again. Number 8, Austin, Texas. For 5 years, Austin was the poster child for unstoppable growth. Tech workers flooding in, Elon relocating headquarters, Tesla following, Oracle following, California license plates everywhere, and rent climbing 30%, 40%, sometimes 50% in neighborhoods that used to house artists and weirdos. The narrative was simple. Austin was the next San Francisco, and if you didn't buy or lock in a lease immediately, you'd be priced out forever. Then the cranes came, and they didn't stop. Between January 2023 and June 2024, developers delivered over 15,000 new apartment units to the Austin metro area. That's not a typo, 15,000. According to the Austin Board of Realtors, the city added more new rental inventory in 18 months than the previous 5 years combined. Developers saw the tech boom, extrapolated it into infinity, and built like Austin was going to add 100,000 new residents every year until the heat death of the universe. Except the tech layoffs started, remote work policies reversed, and suddenly the flood of California transplants willing to pay $2,400 for a 1-bedroom in a complex named something like the Residences at Overpriced Luxury Living slowed to a trickle. Zillow data shows Austin rents dropped 8.2% year over year as of Q3 2024. Apartments.com reports the average 1-bedroom fell from $1,680 to $1,542 in the past 12 months. In East Austin, where rents hit absurd peaks during the frenzy, landlords are offering 6 weeks free on 12-month leases just to fill units. Some complexes in the Domain area are advertising 2 months free, waived application fees, and free parking, which in Austin is the rental equivalent of a white flag. Days on market have doubled. Vacancy rates in new luxury buildings are hovering around 12 to 15%, nearly triple the healthy range. One local property manager told us off the record, "We built for tech workers making $150,000 who wanted rooftop pools and dog spas." Turns out there aren't infinite tech workers, and the ones who are left want to actually save money. The fundamental problem is simple. Austin got high on its own supply. Developers believed their own hype. Banks financed their delusions, and now the market is forcing a correction. For renters, it's the first good news in years. For landlords who bought at the peak, it's a masterclass in what happens when you assume exponential growth lasts forever. And if you thought Austin's correction was dramatic, wait until we head to the city that became a pandemic punchline. Number 7, Boise, Idaho. Remember 2021? When every tech worker with a Patagonia vest discovered they could keep their San Francisco salary, work remotely from anywhere, and Boise became the promised land. When Californians flooded into Idaho like Moses was handing out driver's licenses at the border. When locals watched their hometown turn into an expensive Zoom call suburb and wondered what the hell just happened. Yeah, that's over. Boise rents are down 6.9% year over year, according to Zillow. The median 1-bedroom apartment that peaked at $1,420 in mid-2022 now sits at $1,322. In some neighborhoods near downtown, rents have fallen over 10%, but the real story isn't the percentage, it's the reason. The remote workers are leaving. Redfin data shows Boise experienced net outmigration in 2024 for the first time since 2019. The people who moved there for lifestyle and affordability realized that lifestyle meant 105-degree summers with wildfire smoke and affordability meant paying California rent prices in a city where the best restaurant is still Applebee's. Companies started enforcing return-to-office mandates, tech layoffs accelerated, and suddenly, being 2 hours from the nearest international airport while paying $1,400 for a cookie-cutter apartment felt less like freedom and more like exile. According to the Idaho Association of Realtors, rental inventory has increased 47% since 2022. Days on market for rentals have tripled. Landlords who bought properties in 2021, assuming appreciation would last forever, are now underwater on cash flow, competing with newer builds and offering concessions that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. One landlord in the North End told a local news outlet, "I bought a duplex for $680,000 in 2021, thinking I'd rent both units for $1,500 each. Now I'm getting $1,250 and I still have vacancies." The math doesn't work when your investment thesis was, Californians will pay anything forever. The rental market correction is hitting hardest in the neighborhoods that saw the most speculative buying. Subdivisions built specifically for remote workers, luxury apartments marketed to tech transplants, and converted single-family homes bought by investors who thought Boise was the next Austin. Turns out Boise was just Boise with a temporary California problem, and now that the Californians are going home, the market is reverting to mean. For locals who got priced out of their own city, it's bittersweet relief. For the remote workers who thought they'd found a cheat code, it's a lesson in why hot market's cool. And for anyone still thinking about moving to Boise, the good news is rent is falling. The bad news is you still have to live in Boise. At least in Boise, the remote workers are leaving by choice. Our next city is watching people flee for a much darker reason. Number 6. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix was supposed to be the future. Infinite sprawl, endless sunshine, cheap land, a political environment that treated developers like gods, and a cost of living that made coastal refugees weep with relief. For a decade, the narrative was bulletproof. People were fleeing expensive coastal cities for affordable Sunbelt metros, and Phoenix was the crown jewel. Corporations moved headquarters, retirees cashed out California equity, young families fled Seattle rain, and developers built and built and built. Then people remembered Phoenix exists in a desert that's running out of water, a desert where summer temperatures now regularly exceed 115 degrees, a desert where affordable meant living 45 minutes from anything that matters and commuting on highways that turn into parking lots at 6 a.m. Zillow reports Phoenix rents dropped 5.4% year over year. The median two-bedroom apartment fell from $1,680 to $1,589. In suburbs like Surprise, Avondale, and Goodyear, rents are down 7 to 8%. Vacancy rates have climbed to 8.3%, the highest in 5 years. New apartment complexes in Scottsdale are offering 8 weeks free rent, which tells you exactly how desperate landlords are to fill units in a city that was supposed to have insatiable demand. According to Apartments.com, Phoenix added over 18,000 new rental units in the past 2 years. Developers assumed the California exodus would never stop, that corporations would keep relocating, and that nobody would care about minor inconveniences like catastrophic heat and aquifer depletion. They were wrong on all counts. The return to office mandates hit Phoenix particularly hard because so many of the pandemic transplants were remote workers who moved for weather and affordability. When companies said come back or quit, a lot of them quit Phoenix. The Census Bureau estimates Phoenix lost 11,000 residents in net migration between 2023 and 2024, the first decline in over a decade. But the bigger issue is structural. Phoenix's entire growth model depends on cheap land and endless expansion. When you can't build farther out because there's no water infrastructure, and you can't build higher because the market doesn't support luxury high-rises, you're stuck with massive oversupply in submarkets that are already struggling. Investors who bought rental properties in far-flung developments are learning that build it and they will come only works if they actually want to live in a heat dome 40 miles from employment. One property manager in Tempe put it bluntly, "We built for a fantasy version of Phoenix that doesn't exist. People want walkable neighborhoods, not another stucco box next to a freeway." The market is correcting because reality finally caught up. The rent drops aren't catastrophic yet, but the trend is clear. Phoenix overbuilt for a migration wave that's reversing, in a climate that's becoming unlivable, with infrastructure that can't support the population it already has. For renters, it means better deals. For the growth at all costs model, it means the Sunbelt narrative is cracking. And if Phoenix's problems are environmental, our next city's problems are purely self-inflicted stupidity. Number 5. Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville spent the last decade branding itself as its city. Hot chicken, honky-tonks, Broadway bars where bachelorette parties scream, sang, wag and wheel at decibel levels that violate the Geneva Conventions. The city attracted young professionals, corporations, and developers who all saw the same opportunity: build luxury apartments for an endless stream of transplants with money to burn. Except they all built the exact same thing, at the exact same time, for the exact same people who don't exist in large enough numbers to fill them. Zillow data shows Nashville rents dropped 7.8% year over year. The average one-bedroom luxury apartment fell from $1,820 to $1,678. In neighborhoods like the Gulch, Germantown, and East Nashville, new developments are offering 2 to 3 months free rent on 12-month leases. Some buildings are throwing in waived parking fees, free gym memberships, and 1-month rent applied to moving costs, which is code for "we are desperate and miscalculated badly." According to the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, developers delivered 22,000 new luxury apartment units between 2022 and 2024. The problem is that luxury in Nashville means the same granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and soulless floor plans you can get in any city, except you're paying $2,000 per month to live next to a construction site in a neighborhood that was functional and affordable 3 years ago before developers turned it into an investment vehicle. The median household income in Nashville is $64,000. The rent for a one-bedroom luxury apartment is $1,680. That's over 30% of gross income, and that's before utilities, parking, and the mandatory amenity fees landlords tack on to juice their revenue. The math doesn't work, which is why occupancy rates in new luxury buildings are hovering around 78%, well below the 93 to 95% that makes the financing pencil out. One local realtor told us, "Developers built for an imaginary demographic, 26-year-olds making $90,000 who want to live in a building with a rooftop pool they'll use twice." That person exists, but there are maybe 4,000 of them in Nashville, and we built 22,000 units. The fallout is predictable. Landlords are stuck with debt service on properties that aren't generating projected cash flow. Renters who can afford luxury pricing are getting ridiculous deals, while everyone else is still priced out because nobody built workforce housing. And Nashville's reputation as an affordable southern alternative is fully dead, replaced by the reality that it's now just an expensive city with good barbecue. The irony is that Nashville had a chance to grow sustainably, to build housing for the teachers and nurses and service workers who actually make the city function. Instead, developers chased maximum returns, banks financed their delusions, and now the market is punishing everyone involved. For renters with money, it's a buyer's market. For everyone else, it's proof that luxury is just a word landlords use to justify pricing people out of their own city. At least Nashville's crisis is driven by greed. Our next city's rent drops come from something darker. Number 4. Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas is a city built on one idea. Tourists spend money. Casinos hire workers. Workers need housing. Housing drives growth. Growth attracts more casinos. Repeat until the desert runs out. For decades, it worked. Vegas was the rare American city where a service worker could afford to live near where they worked, where housing was cheap, and where the boom-bust cycles were predictable and manageable. Then the pandemic broke the model. Zillow reports Las Vegas rents dropped 6.7% year over year. The median one-bedroom apartment fell from $1,450 to $1,353. In Henderson and Summerlin, the suburbs where workers fled during the pandemic to avoid strip chaos, rents are down 8 to 9%. According to Apartments.com, days on market for rentals have increased from 18 days in 2022 to 47 days in 2024. Landlords are offering 6 weeks free, waived deposits, and flexible lease terms, which in Vegas means the tourism economy isn't supporting the rent prices anymore. The problem is layered. First, Vegas added 19,000 new apartment units since 2022, most of them targeting the same corporate relocations and remote workers every other Sunbelt city was chasing. Second, tourism hasn't fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels despite what the casinos report. Conventions are down, international travel is softer, and domestic tourists are spending less per visit. Third, service worker wages have stagnated while everything else got more expensive, meaning the people who who actually run Vegas can't afford to live there. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the median wage for hospitality workers in Las Vegas is $31,400. The average two-bedroom apartment rent in 2023 was $1,580. That's over 60% of gross income for a single worker, which is why you're seeing 3 and 4 roommates in units designed for 2, workers commuting from Pahrump and Boulder City, and a rental market that finally can't sustain its own pricing. One casino worker told a local news outlet, "I've worked on the Strip for 12 years. I used to live 15 minutes away. Now I live 45 minutes away because rent doubled and my wages went up $2 per hour. When my lease ends, I'm leaving Vegas. I can't afford the city I built." The rent drops aren't happening because Vegas is dying. They're happening because the economic foundation, the service workers, and middle-income families got priced out during the boom, and now landlords are realizing you can't sustain a rental market on tourists and retirees alone. The new apartments sit partially empty while workers leave, and the death spiral quietly begins. For renters still in Vegas, the falling prices are relief. For the city's long-term viability, it's a warning that you can't build an economy on $15 per hour workers and $1,600 per month rent. Something has to give, and right now, it's the landlords. At least Vegas tried to support its workers. Our next city never even pretended. Number 3, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minneapolis is on this list for a completely different reason than every other city. It's not here because developers overbuilt. It's not here because a migration wave reversed. It's not here because of an economic crisis or climate disaster. Minneapolis is here because it never lost its mind in the first place, and now it's quietly correcting from expensive back to reasonable, while the rest of the country melts down. Zillow data shows Minneapolis rents dropped 4.6% year over year. That's the smallest decline on our list, but here's the context. Minneapolis rents were already 20 to 30% cheaper than comparable coastal cities. The median one-bedroom fell from $1,380 to $1,317. In neighborhoods like Uptown, Northeast, and Dinkytown, landlords are offering 4 to 6 weeks free on annual leases. Not because they're desperate, but because competition is finally forcing them to offer actual value. According to the Minneapolis Area Association of Realtors, the city added 8,400 new rental units in the past 2 years. That's not insane oversupply like Phoenix or Nashville. That's measured growth from a city that maintained strict zoning reforms, encouraged transit-oriented development, and never fully surrendered to the luxury-only development model that broke everywhere else. The rent drops are happening because Minneapolis builders actually constructed workforce housing, studios and one-bedrooms for teachers, nurses, and service workers, buildings near transit lines instead of exclusively in gentrified neighborhoods, mixed-income developments instead of exclusively chasing the luxury market, revolutionary concepts that somehow worked. The result is a rental market that's correcting gently instead of collapsing violently. Vacancy rates are around 6.8%, which is higher than the pandemic but nowhere near crisis levels. Days on market increased from 22 to 35 days, which means renters have options without landlords panicking. And perhaps most importantly, the median renter in Minneapolis spends 28% of their income on rent, which is the first time we've mentioned a percentage under 30% on this entire list. One local housing advocate told Minnesota Public Radio, "We didn't avoid the rent crisis because we're special. We avoided it because we didn't let developers do whatever they wanted. We required affordability. We upzoned near transit. We didn't treat housing like a pure investment vehicle. And now we're reaping the benefits while everyone else is in free fall." Picture this. February in Minneapolis. It's 12 degrees. The sky is that particular shade of gray that makes you question your life choices, and you're shoveling your car out for the 3rd time this week. But your rent is $1,280 for a one-bedroom near a light rail station. You can walk to a grocery store that's not a Dollar General, and your landlord isn't offering you 3 months free because the market collapsed. That's not exciting. That's just functional. And in 2024 America, functional feels like winning. Minneapolis isn't sexy. It won't make real estate influencer highlight reels, but it's proof that cities can build housing without losing their souls, and that markets don't have to boom and bust if you implement basic policy sanity. Of course, sanity is boring. Our next city proves that when Wall Street gets involved, chaos is guaranteed. Number 2, Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta became ground zero for one of the most destructive housing experiments in modern American history. Wall Street buying up entire neighborhoods, converting single-family homes into rentals, and turning the American dream into a monthly subscription service. Investment firms like Invitation Homes, American Homes 4 Rent, and dozens of smaller vultures spent the 2010s purchasing tens of thousands of homes across metro Atlanta, betting that renters would pay indefinitely and appreciation would never stop. They were wrong, and now they're running. Zillow reports Atlanta rents dropped 8.4% year over year. The median 3-bedroom single-family rental fell from $2,240 to $2,052. In suburbs like Gwinnett County, Cobb County, and South Fulton, institutional investors are quietly dumping entire portfolios. According to Redfin, corporate landlord sales increased 43% in the Atlanta metro between Q1 2023 and Q3 2024. They're not selling because the market is hot. They're selling because the rental income doesn't cover the debt service anymore and appreciation stalled. Here's what happened. Wall Street bought homes at inflated prices during the post-2008 recovery, financed the purchases with cheap debt, and raised rents aggressively to juice returns for investors. They assumed rents would keep climbing 5 to 7% annually forever, that tenants would have no choice but to pay, and that appreciation would bail them out if cash flow got tight. Then interest rates went up, debt got expensive, maintenance costs for aging homes ate into margins, and renters, facing a glut of new apartment construction and moderating prices, started moving out of overpriced single-family rentals into cheaper options. Suddenly, the Wall Street rental empire was bleeding cash. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, vacancy rates for institutional single-family rentals hit 11.2% in mid-2024, nearly double the 6% rate in 2021. Days on market for these rentals increased from 23 days to 64 days. And the rental concessions being offered, things like 2 months free and waived pet fees, signal that landlords are desperate to avoid empty properties eating cash every month. One former property manager for a major institutional landlord told us off the record, the model only worked with cheap debt and endless rent growth. When both of those disappeared, the whole thing collapsed. We were selling homes as fast as we could find buyers because holding them was financial suicide. For renters, this is unambiguous good news. The corporate landlords who destroyed housing affordability are retreating, supply is increasing, and prices are falling. For the investors who believed Wall Street propaganda about housing as an asset class, it's a billion-dollar lesson in what happens when you treat shelter like a stock portfolio. Atlanta's rent drops aren't the biggest on our list, but they represent something more significant. Proof that when financial engineering meets housing reality, reality wins. The corporate rental experiment failed, the landlords are fleeing, and renters, for the first time in over a decade, have leverage. But if you think Wall Street retreating is dramatic, wait until you see what happens when a crisis that should raise rents accidentally destroys them instead. Number 1. Tampa, Florida. Here's the irony that breaks the entire housing market. Tampa is experiencing one of the most severe housing crises in America. Insurance costs are making homeownership functionally impossible. Climate disasters are increasing every year, and rent is falling. Not 2%, not 5%. In some Tampa submarkets, rents dropped 12 to 15% year over year. The city that should be experiencing a rental demand explosion is instead watching landlords capitulate and flee. Zillow data shows Tampa rents fell 10.3% year over year across the metro. The median 2-bedroom apartment dropped from $2,100 to $1,884. In neighborhoods like South Tampa, West Chase, and Brandon, landlords are offering 2 to 3 months free rent. According to Apartments.com, vacancy rates hit 9.7%, the highest in a decade. Days on market for rentals doubled from 26 to 53 days. This is a market in free fall. Here's what's happening. Florida's insurance crisis is forcing homeowners out of the market. Policies that cost $2,000 annually in 2019 now cost $8,000 to $12,000. Insurance companies are fleeing the state entirely. Citizens Property Insurance, the state-run insurer of last resort, is overwhelmed and raising rates 40 to 50% annually. Homeownership is collapsing, which theoretically should drive demand for rentals through the roof. Except landlords face the same insurance crisis. A landlord with a $400,000 rental property now pays $10,000 to $15,000 annually for insurance, up from $3,000 3 years ago. Add in property taxes, maintenance, and mortgage costs, and the cash flow doesn't work. Rent would need to be $3,500 to $4,000 per month just to break even, and the market won't bear that pricing, so landlords are selling. According to the Tampa Bay Times, investor-owned rental properties listed for sale increased 67% between 2023 and 2024. These aren't owners cashing out at the peak. These are landlords cutting losses before the next hurricane hits and insurance becomes literally unavailable at any price. The ones who can't sell are slashing rents just to keep cash flowing, because an occupied unit at $1,800 is better than an empty unit at $2,400 when insurance is bleeding you dry. Redfin reports that institutional investors, the Wall Street firms that bought up Tampa real estate during the pandemic, are dumping Florida holdings faster than any other state. One Tampa property management company told local media, "Our clients are terrified. They're watching insurance costs eat all their profit, and they know the next hurricane could wipe them out entirely. They're selling to anyone who'll buy, and they're dropping rents to avoid vacancies while they list. The renters who remain are getting deals that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. 3-bedroom homes in decent school districts for $2,200 with 2 months free. Luxury apartments offering rent freezes for 2-year leases. Landlords waiving pet fees, parking fees, and application fees just to compete." But here's the existential question. What happens when the landlords are all gone? When insurance costs force every small and mid-sized investor out of the rental market, and only the massive institutional players with enough capital to self-insure remain? Tampa's rent drops aren't relief. They're a symptom of a housing market eating itself alive. Picture this: August in Tampa, afternoon thunderstorm rolling in, humidity thick enough to swim through, AC running 24/7. You just signed a lease for $1,850, down from $2,300 last year, 2 months free, parking included. You're thrilled. Then you check your landlord's insurance bill and realize they're losing money every month you live there. And eventually they're going to sell to someone who doesn't care about cash flow or who can afford to wait out the crisis. Or worse, they'll sell to a developer who will bulldoze the whole complex and build luxury condos no one can afford. Tampa's rent drops are the market screaming that something is fundamentally broken. Insurance costs, climate risk, corporate landlord retreat, and speculative overbuilding all colliding at once. For renters, it's a temporary window of opportunity. For the long-term viability of Florida housing, it's an apocalypse in slow motion. And if you thought Austin's oversupply was bad, or Boise's exodus was dramatic, or Atlanta's Wall Street retreat was significant, Tampa is the ultimate proof that housing markets don't obey the rules everyone assumes. Sometimes the crisis that should raise prices tanks them instead. Sometimes landlords lose. And sometimes renters get a break, not because policy worked or markets corrected naturally, but because everyone involved in the system is quietly panicking and running for the exits. So there it is, 8 major US cities where rents are falling and almost nobody's talking about it. Austin's oversupply correction, Boise's exodus reversal, Phoenix's Sunbelt reality check, Nashville's luxury glut, Vegas's tourism wobble, Minneapolis's Midwest sanity, Atlanta's corporate retreat, and Tampa's insurance apocalypse. These aren't anomalies, these are sustained rent declines, proving that markets can correct, landlords can lose, and renters aren't permanently screwed. If you're in one of these markets, this is your window. Negotiate, demand concessions, make landlords compete. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with your city. The rent crisis isn't over everywhere, but it's cracking.